Rome is quiet for once. Midnight filters through the marbled halls of the Imperial Palace, whispering secrets across cold stone. But behind a silk-draped door, the Empress of the world's greatest empire is locked in a race against fatigue, against shame, against history itself. The record says 25 men in one night. Others claim 60. There is no proof, and yet the rumor survives like a parasite, feeding on scandal, on fascination, on the terrifying notion that a woman married to the emperor would dare operate a brothel from within the very heart of Rome. Her name is Messalina, and this is not merely a story of lust. This is warfare, a calculated assault against power, against control, against the fragile myth of Roman virtue that masks the empire's brutal reality. The question that haunts historians and gossips alike is not what she did, but why. Why would a noblewoman of ancient lineage, seated beside Emperor Claudius on the throne of the civilized world, deliberately descend into the city's most degrading vice? And what terrible price did Rome pay when she did? To understand the answer, we must descend not into gutter or gossip, but into the machinery of Roman power itself. Messalina is not born to rule, she is engineered for it. Groomed like a weapon behind gold-trimmed walls, fluent in political intrigue before her first blood. Her mother, Domitia, carries the potent lineage of Mark Antony and Octavia, whispering ambitions that curl like incense through their villa before Messalina takes her first step. In this world, femininity is calculated performance, sexuality is hard currency, and alliances are forged not with treaties, but with calculated intimacies and venom-tipped smiles.
Count it quickly.
Messalina learns viscerally that to survive in Rome is to manipulate the men who believe they rule it. Each night, she witnesses powerful senators clutching their dignified togas by day, only to spill their secrets across the bedsheets of slaves by dark. She watches her husband, Emperor Claudius, that stuttering scholar turned reluctant sovereign, perpetually ignored, chronically underestimated, consistently used. She does not hate him, she simply recognizes he is not the genuine threat. Rome itself is the beast that must be mastered. And to tame it, she must transform herself into something even Rome, with all its decadence, has never witnessed before. She chooses her battlefield not in the Senate, where voices sculpt law from raw ambition, nor on the bloody parade grounds where generals purchase glory with soldiers' lives, but in the perfumed, fever-warm chambers Rome refuses to acknowledge. She builds her empire methodically, in bedrooms, marble alcoves, and behind silken curtains precisely parted for whispered intelligence to pass through. Then, balancing on the knife edge between calculation and consuming ambition, she births her masterpiece, a brothel concealed not in the festering Subura district, but within the sacred walls of the Imperial Palace itself. She populates it with courtesans who survive by her grace alone, women who trade state secrets for protection, who disappear without trace should they betray her trust. The most influential men in Rome dismiss the place as scandalous fiction until the moment they receive her invitation, delivered with devastating simplicity, a wordless nod, an unmarked ring left where only they would find it, an offer impossible to refuse yet unspeakable to accept. Once they cross her threshold, these men maintain their silence, not from fear of public shame, but because in the incense-hazed darkness of her chambers, they recognize something fundamental to Rome has been irrevocably shattered. Their terror stems not from the carnal acts themselves, but from the horrifying revelation that the true power has shifted, that the emperor's wife has reforged desire itself into a weapon no military formation can counter, no senatorial decree can disarm. But power that rewrites the rules breeds enemies who hunt its source. Across the forum, in the cavernous halls of the Curia, whispers congeal into conspiracies. Senators, once content to be players in her game, now feel the cold grip of manipulation around their throats. Narcissus, the emperor's freedman and most cunning advisor, is first to detect the shifting winds. Calculating, merciless, with intelligence that cuts through deception like a surgeon's knife. He perceives what Claudius willfully ignores. While the emperor loses himself in architectural schematics and obscure linguistic treatises, his wife weaves herself into the very fabric of Roman governance. Narcissus observes the imperial palace transform into something unrecognizable, a place where politics and pleasure have become indistinguishable, impossible to separate. He meticulously tallies those ensnared in Messalina's intricate web, noticing with growing alarm how they occupy the empire's most critical positions: praetors, consuls, treasury officials, men whose sacred oath binds them to Claudius, yet who now tremble at Messalina's slightest displeasure. Every secret extracted during her nocturnal enterprises returns as political currency, votes secured, appointments influenced, rivals neutralized. He watches Rome itself tilt on its axis beneath her influence, conquered not through conventional warfare but through calculated intimacy and devastating knowledge. The realization strikes him with paralyzing clarity. Messalina has constructed not merely a scandal but a parallel state, a shadow imperium operating within the empire's heart. His question evolves from simple curiosity to existential dread, no longer wondering what drives her ambition, but how to dismantle her power before the Roman state itself becomes merely another conquest in her collection. And while Narcissus plots in silence, Messalina moves with the elegance of inevitability. She thrives in the very chaos she orchestrates, her calculated performance never faltering. Every whispered word becomes currency, every intimate touch a strategic maneuver in her grand design. Her predatory gaze now fixes upon Gaius Silius, the most beautiful man in Rome, a rising star whose political influence grows with each passing day. In public forums, he stands a paragon of virtue, martial loyalty, and republican values, commanding respect not through forceful rhetoric, but through the careful silences that fall when he enters a room. In private chambers, Messalina draws him into her gravitational pull with inexorable force. She offers this handsome patrician not merely the fleeting ecstasies of her body, but something far more intoxicating: partnership in genuine power. Together they speak treason in breathless moments, planning not merely adultery, but marriage while Claudius still wears the purple, their audacity expanding with each clandestine meeting. As Rome loses itself in endless festivals and gladiatorial spectacles, its empress and her chosen consort construct a conspiracy woven from passion and ambition, reinforced with the steel of political calculation. The brothel becomes merely a foundation for something far more dangerous: high treason disguised as uncontrollable desire, revolution concealed behind bedroom doors and whispered oaths. The question consuming Rome's inner circles shifts dramatically, no longer speculating about the depths of her depravity, but wondering how many heartbeats remain before her smoldering ambition ignites the entire empire. The marriage takes place within autumn shadows, a ceremony Rome was never meant to witness. In a ritual draped in imperial sacrilege, Messalina and Silius exchange vows and blood promises, while Claudius remains ensconced in his study, fingers tracing Etruscan grammatical patterns, utterly blind to the revolution unfolding within his own walls. They celebrate with wine that tastes of victory, surrounded by conspirators who have gambled their lineage on this unprecedented coup. But Rome's greatest weapon has always been information, and Narcissus has cultivated an invisible network that penetrates every alcove of power. When confirmation of the illegal marriage reaches him, the proof clenched in his fist like a dagger, he recognizes the moment history pivots. He assembles not military tribunes, but a shadow cabinet of imperial freedmen, palace officials, and aristocrats who suddenly comprehend their proximity to annihilation. Their deliberation is brief, cold with terror. Claudius must be confronted with truth so shocking it burns through his scholarly detachment. As Messalina reclines in the gardens of Lucullus, drunk on triumph and certainty, the machinery of imperial vengeance awakens. Praetorians materialize from morning mist, their formation silent, implacable. Silius is captured in the Forum, his legendary beauty transformed by animal fear as he screams for senatorial procedure while soldiers drag him through streets where he once processed indignity. His execution is public, necessary, a spectacle that restores imperial authority with each pulse of blood. Messalina flees to her mother's villa, her body convulsing with sobs that seem to surprise even her, as if emotion itself is an unfamiliar country. For the first time, calculation abandons her. Claudius, his face hollowed by betrayal, cannot speak the words that will end the woman who shared his bed and bore his children. The burden falls to Narcissus, who orchestrates her final moments with the efficiency that has defined his service. On a secluded hillside where indifferent olive trees cast shifting shadows, surrounded by soldiers whose faces might as well be carved from the same stone as their weapons, Messalina is offered the dignity of choosing her own exit. The dagger lies before her, gleaming with terrible purpose. Her hand reaches, falters, retreats. Her pleas turn from desperate negotiation to incoherent begging. The waiting ends. A centurion steps forward, following orders that will never appear in official records. The sword's arc is precise, emotionless. Her body crumples among wildflowers that will continue blooming tomorrow, indifferent to the blood that feeds their roots. But the silence following her execution reverberates through Rome with deafening power. The empire inhales collectively, gasping at its narrow escape from catastrophe. Claudius retreats into obsessive administrative minutiae, his quills scratching endlessly across parchment as if each decree might erase her memory. When courtiers mention her name, his face contorts with such naked anguish. They never dare repeat the mistake. In the Senate, men who once writhed with pleasure in her secret chambers now deliver impassioned speeches on virtue, their voices catching when they condemn her crimes, their nightmares populated by what she knew. Narcissus ascends temporarily, his clinical precision in dismantling her network earning him unprecedented influence, until that same ruthless competence marks him as too dangerous to survive. The brothel itself vanishes like morning mist, its participants scattered, silenced or entombed, leaving only whispered legends that mothers used to warn ambitious daughters. Yet Messalina's true conquest proves indelible. Rome itself has been fundamentally altered, infected with awareness that power flows through channels no legionary formation can secure. Every wife studying her husband's expressions, every courtesan collecting pillow confessions, every slave girl standing invisible in corners absorbs the revolutionary truth Messalina demonstrated, that empires built by men contain secret architectures accessible to women. The wildflowers on her execution ground bloom with unnatural vibrancy each spring, as though nourished by the blood of a woman who understood that true dominance requires no crown, only the courage to recognize power's authentic form. Years later, a philosopher scratches words upon parchment by lamplight, his hand trembling as he writes what no one dares speak aloud. The empire fractured not through rebellion, but through appetite. One woman's hunger taught Rome to tremble at its own shadow. What endures of Messalina is not history but terror, not identity but archetype. Her narrative transforms across centuries, whispered through monastery halls as moral caution, rendered in vivid frescoes as divine warning, codified in legal precedents as the embodiment of female transgression. She becomes simultaneously too dangerous to remember truthfully and too essential to forget entirely. Every subsequent empress exists beneath the looming shadow of her audacity. While her remains lie silent beneath indifferent olive trees, her spectre haunts imperial corridors and perfumed chambers where authority still drapes itself in silk and ambition's price leaves no visible wounds. Rome pretends to recover, yet the wound refuses to heal, a phantom pain eternally reminding the empires of the night when the world's greatest power was undone not through military defeat or barbarian invasion, but through calculated desire, held unwavering in the gaze of an empress who refused to acknowledge any constraint invented by men. And perhaps the most haunting detail is this, buried not in scrolls or public record, but in the silent choreography of those still living under her unspoken influence. Centuries later, when Europe burns through dynastic warfare and revolutions masked as reform, when women whisper their own names back into forgotten ledgers, Messalina's legend becomes code, warning, prophecy. In the dim chambers where noblewomen plot seduction like military campaigns, her name evokes both reverence and revulsion. Within a hidden archive in Ravenna, a note survives, unsigned, scribbled in a fragile feminine hand beside a decayed imperial seal. She made them kneel without ever drawing a blade. No monument captures her likeness, no statue survives the purge of her memory. But Messalina endures in the architecture of fear she constructed, in the whispers that haunt each emperor's wife thereafter, in the visceral knowledge that brothels can wield more influence than battlefields, and empresses can pose greater threats than legions. Her story begins in calculated desire, culminates in public execution, but persists like blood soaked into fertile soil, a warning that even Rome, with all its military might and disciplined governance, could be fractured from within by a single woman who recognized that pleasure, wielded strategically, could overpower any weapon forged in imperial armories. So the next time history attempts to wield the past as a weapon to silence, to diminish, or to reduce a woman to merely her desires, remember Messalina rising from the ashes of euphemism and calculated misremembering. She stands not as martyr, not as monster, but as mirror, reflecting back to an empire that believed itself invincible, the truth of its crumbling moral foundations, its desperate hunger for control, concealed beneath pristine togas and ceremonial laurel wreaths. Her brothel, hidden behind velvet curtains and protected by enforced silence, became the sacred space where Rome was forced to confront its own spectacular hypocrisy. In that confrontation, something fundamental shattered within the imperial consciousness. Not merely a conspiracy uncovered, not simply an empress executed, but the grand illusion that power resided exclusively in swords, legions, and senatorial decrees. With ruthless precision, Messalina demonstrated that authority could also pulse through whispers, through flesh, through calculated intimacies occurring far from marble amphitheaters, yet capable of bringing them crashing down to dust. This remains her true legacy, an inheritance of strategic terror she deliberately cultivated. This explains why, no matter how thoroughly her story is buried beneath historical revision and masculine discomfort, it continues to beat with furious rhythm beneath the ancient stones of Rome, a heart refusing to be silenced, a revolution temporarily defeated, but never truly forgotten. And it is in this terrified remembering that her danger multiplies. Messalina is not merely a historical footnote, but a litmus test for every civilization that follows, a question carved beneath every throne, every diplomatic marriage, every state that believes desire can be safely contained. Her legend reverberates wherever women are feared for being too ambitious, too calculating, or too perceptive. In the margins of coronation manuscripts, in trial transcripts where truth dissolves into fabrication. In the intimate negotiations that shape empires yet never appear in official chronicles, Messalina's influence persists. Her weapon was neither seduction nor outright rebellion, but something civilization finds far more threatening, the recognition that reality itself is malleable, that even within the empire's most sacred institutions, power flows through channels men cannot fully control. This revelation cost her everything, her lover's life, her royal standing, her very breath, but it etched her name into the foundations of Western civilization. The woman Rome attempted to obliterate through public execution and systematic erasure survives precisely because of what she recognized. The true authority resides not in offices or titles, but in understanding the hidden architectures of desire and fear. She remains the shadow empress haunting the corridors, between written law and lived experience, not awaiting historical vindication, but watching with knowing eyes to see who next will comprehend the game she mastered. So beware the temptation to dismiss her as mere anomaly, lest you miss the deeper truth she exposes, that beneath every empire's polished marble lies a knot of raw contradictions waiting to be unraveled by those who refuse to be governed by convention. In Messalina's meteoric rise and bloody fall, we witness not the cautionary tale of a wayward wife, but a masterclass in subversion hiding in plain sight. Her brothel was never mere scandal. It was calculated system disruption, a living manifesto carved from unsatisfied hunger, tactical intellect, and breathtaking fearlessness. That is why her name survives, where entire legions have vanished from memory, why her silken revolution echoes where mighty temples have crumbled to dust. The brothel within the palace walls was not her disgrace but her theater of operations, her message written in fevered breaths and strategic silence. Power yields not to tradition, but to those audacious enough to reimagine its very nature. And centuries later, beneath the weathered plaster of forgotten frescoes and the rhythm of stories, women whisper when men leave the room. The pulse of her defiance continues unabated. Time may obliterate monuments, but legend, honed by visceral truth and ancestral terror, endures beyond marble and gold. Messalina reigns still, wherever fear blooms in corridors of governance, wherever desire calculates its next move, wherever power unexpectedly reveals itself, wearing a woman's unrepentant face. So the next time history attempts to wield the past as a weapon to silence, to diminish or to reduce a woman to merely her desires, remember Messalina rising from the ashes of euphemism and calculated misremembering. She stands not as martyr, not as monster, but as mirror, reflecting back to an empire that believed itself invincible, the truth of its crumbling moral foundations, its desperate hunger for control, concealed beneath pristine togas and ceremonial laurel wreath. Her brothel, hidden behind velvet curtains and protected by enforced silence, became the sacred space where Rome was forced to confront its own spectacular hypocrisy. In that confrontation, something fundamental shattered within the imperial consciousness. Not merely a conspiracy uncovered, not simply an empress executed, but the grand illusion that power resided exclusively in swords, legions, and senatorial decrees. With ruthless precision, Messalina demonstrated that authority could also pulse through whispers, through flesh, through calculated intimacies occurring far from marble amphitheaters, yet capable of bringing them crashing down to dust. This remains her true legacy, an inheritance of strategic terror she deliberately cultivated. This explains why, no matter how thoroughly her story is buried beneath historical revision and masculine discomfort, it continues to beat with furious rhythm beneath the ancient stones of Rome. A heart refusing to be silenced, a revolution temporarily defeated but never truly forgotten. So as torches fade and scrolls crumble to dust, the question persists like lingering smoke in abandoned corridors. What transformation occurs when a woman reconceives pleasure as power, intimacy as revolution? Messalina's existence transcends mere imperial scandal or conjugal betrayal. It emerges as a tactical manual for how those condemned to society's periphery can infiltrate its very heart, how the overlooked ascend through passageways unmarked on official maps. Centuries after her likeness is chiseled from monuments, her influence still courses through the veins of every strategist who recognizes that whispered secrets cut deeper than steel, and calculated closeness outmaneuvers any legion. In the long eclipse of Rome's fallen glory, across collapsed empires and corrupted republics, her aftershocks continue delivering visceral warnings to the powerful that beneath ornate legislation and ceremonial grandeur, true authority belongs to those bold enough to grasp it with unflinching hands and merciless clarity. Historians may draw close the curtains on her story, but Messalina's brothel never truly vanished from civilization's architecture. It waits in patient silence, veiled in silken shadows, for the next voice daring enough to pronounce its resurrection. And so, the curtain falls not on a simple morality tale, but on a sovereign blueprint carved from defiance, strategic brilliance, and danger masquerading as desire. Messalina's brothel may be razed, her statues shattered, her name smeared across generations as warning, but her methodology endures in the very foundations of imperial architecture. Each time a woman ascends to power beyond traditional constraints, each maneuver concealed within intimacy, each regime destabilized by the quiet certainty of feminine calculation, Messalina resurfaces, not in physical form, but in strategic force. Beneath Rome's weathered ruins, under fallen temples, buried archives, and centuries of deliberate forgetting, the essence of that palace brothel persists with unwavering intensity, refusing extinction. It remains simultaneously memory, threat, and promise, a testament that in the eternal struggle for civilization's soul, the true danger lies not merely in legions bristling with weapons, but in the women who recognize how to transform desire into devastating power, exploiting the vulnerabilities empires are too arrogant to acknowledge or defend against. And it ends, as it must, not in glory or condemnation, but in silence thick with recognition. The lesson sealed in Messalina's final breath seeps into stone and institution alike, that empires crumble not simply from outside invasion or fiscal collapse, but from within, undone by those who learn to manipulate the very appetites upon which their power rests. Her ambition was not anomaly, but prophecy. Her brothel not scandal, but blueprint. In the centuries that follow, her methodology resurfaces wherever power confronts its own vulnerabilities. In shadowed court intrigues, in diplomatic bedchambers where empires are negotiated between breaths, in every instance where desire transforms into strategic advantage. Her true immortality lies not in surviving texts that vilify her name, but in the visceral terror she planted within patriarchal governance, the persistent awareness that behind every calculated smile might lurk another Messalina, another woman who has decoded power's genuine architecture. Even now, behind closed doors and velvet screens, her legacy manifests whenever someone recognizes that Rome's greatest weapon was never its legions, but its capacity for seduction, a weapon that, when turned against itself, proved utterly devastating. That remains her enduring conquest, not a brothel within palace walls, but the inescapable knowledge that no empire, however mighty, is impervious to subversion from those it believes it has already conquered. Messalina disappears from marble, vanishes from coins, erased by imperial decree but never truly gone. Her story survives not in libraries, but in the unease that prickles down the spines of rulers who dare underestimate the invisible. In every chamber where alliances are forged with glances, where empires tremble under the weight of concealed truths, the air still carries her presence like charged perfume. Centuries later, her methodology resurfaces wherever men of power gather, whispering secrets they believe will never escape silk-draped rooms. Her name becomes cipher, warning, and invocation, spoken with both fear and grudging respect by those who understand true influence. And so the palace sleeps again, as it did the night Rome unknowingly bowed to a different kind of empress, one who ruled not with armies, but with an understanding of power that outlasts stone and blood. In the end, Messalina wins not by surviving, but by becoming unkillable, woven into the architecture of fear, thriving in the memory Rome tried to destroy, a ghost crowned with silence, seductive and unrepentant, forever reigning in the shadows where empire meets desire.